Why is it?
Got it.
Thank
Hi.
you.
You're welcome. Thank you. And thanks for the lovely introduction. I'm going to share my screen and then I'll tell you a little bit more about myself and how this all started. All right. And also, as we go, feel free to, I love engaging with the chat, so feel free to put questions or comments in the chat. Or you can even unmute yourself if you have a question as we go along. There'll be some parts that are sort of more interactive, and I also just, happy to answer questions as we go along that might come up. And then ideally we'll have time at the end also for like a live Q&A. So up to you. I'm very flexible about how we handle questions and conversation. All right, so tonight's workshop is called Set Up a Workspace That Nourishes Your Creative Work. And this is been and become really my passion project since the start of the pandemic. My company is Reclaim Your Space, and it was established in 2020, and it was established in the very heart of lockdown. I had been for over 15 years after getting my degree in interior design. I'd been running a home remodeling business. And when COVID happened here in New York, we had to just stop what we were doing, stop going into people's homes, stop working on our projects. We had to leave some clients with half-finished renovations for a while. And I found myself kind of wondering, how can I support people in their homes if I can't go into their home? And also, people are now in their homes more than ever before. And how can I kind of take all that I've learned and really like impart that to folks in a new way and in a new format where I was empowering people in their own spaces rather than creating projects and managing projects for them. So it was like a pretty big shift. And thanks to the magic of Zoom, I suddenly found that I was supporting people with their homes all around the world, folks on every continent except Antarctica, which was really fun. And it felt kind of like I got to sprinkle fairy dust in people's homes in that way. The focus began with clutter clearing because it was a very easy way for people to learn a process, get their hands on objects in the space, and then create really noticeable shifts and changes in their environment. And what was fascinating to me was that as people were creating these changes in their environment by clearing clutter and opening up their space in that way, it was shifting other aspects of their life as well. It was shifting how they were feeling about things, so does their emotional state. It was allowing energy to flow in the work that they were doing, in their relationships, in new opportunities, and new ideas, new ways of thinking about things, new ways of expressing themselves. And so this interconnectivity between the environment and the kind of internal landscape of a person's life was super fascinating to me. And so that's where I'm going to kind of go with our talk today. As we get started, I'd also love to hear about you. If you'd like to introduce yourselves either in the chat or on the mic, I'd love to kind of hear a little bit about what type of art you make, what type of space you work from, whether it's for making your art or the other parts of your business around making your art, if you have a business around it. That'll help me also to kind of tailor what I'm talking about to kind of fit more specifically what it is that your settings, your environments, types of things that might be coming up for you. So if you want to put in the chat, you can. You can do that now, or feel free to unmute. You can say hello that way. Does anyone want to get started? Do you guys see the chat? Oh, there we go. Barbara. Hi, Barbara. All right, Barbara's a glass artist and a curator. Awesome. Anybody else? And Barbara, I'd love to hear a little bit about the type of space that you work in. Do you have your own studio? Do you work from a space in your home? Do you share a studio with someone? Those are sort of interesting for me to get going. Miles, photographer, filmmaker, animator, and draftsman. Awesome. Love it. Barbara. 2 studios, one outside the home and one in the home. Awesome. Gretchen. I paint. I love hate to paint, and the hope and moment is towards going deeper into the child self that is the creative one. Love it. Timothy. Figurative oil painter in a tiny space in my home that doubles as a home office. Got it. Lisa, photographer, multimedia installation artist. Yes, got to enjoy some of your installations. They're awesome. One of the things that I'll mention as you continue kind of putting in the chat is it's rarely about how much space we have, right? It's very much about how intentional we get with our space. So I'll share a story that I once, about 10 years ago now, got to walk through the studio of a very well-established artist. The studio renovation was like $4 million. I remember walking through, and at some point I got this like really big rush of emotion, and I was like, oh, I want a space to make art too. And at the time, like I said, I was working in home renovations. I didn't have my own art space, let alone even an office. It was kind of a space in our home. And I was like, wow, that was like a really big desire that came up. And it wasn't until years later, many years later, in 2020, I moved out of my family's home, and I rented, for a period of time, I rented a small bedroom in a shared house. And in that small bedroom, I set up my whole life, and I was like, what do I want to prioritize? And I had this little coffee table, this beautiful tablecloth over it, and that became my art studio. And that was the first time that I was like, oh, I'm going to prioritize making art as a part of my day-to-day kind of routine, as a part of what I do all the time. And so that dedicated space became both symbolic, but also very significant in terms of kind of the intentionality of it, right? So I think it can be really interesting to see how art can weave into our space in unexpected ways as well. Aviva, I recently moved to a new home in New Jersey. I am fortunate to have a big room lined with cabinets that I have set up as my studio. Awesome. I paint in acrylics and watercolors and create assemblage pieces. Awesome. Thank you for sharing. All right, so we will keep going. Anyone, again, as we go along, feel free to share in the chat. So some thoughts, and I mentioned at the start, I don't know if everyone was here yet, that it'd be great for you to have a journal or someplace to take notes or sketch, because I'm going to be asking you some questions that only you can answer, and they're really only for you. There is not one right way to set up a workspace that's going to magically turn on your creative flow, right? But really aligning your space with what is good for you, what works well for you, what lines up with your desire and your personal kind of inspiration is going to be key. So I will be pointing you always back to yourself as we go through these questions. And so again, I invite you to take some time to think about them and take notes for yourself, and feel free to share as much or as little as you want as we go along. So what is your relationship to your creative work? And I phrase it this way really intentionally, because I think that in order to nourish our creative work, we have to understand what is that relationship, and relationships, what do relationships require of us? They require time, attention, intention, thoughtfulness, sometimes healing, repair. Right? So what is the current state of your relationship to your creative work? And where do you see that it's flowing? And where does it feel like it might be stuck? And after you've kind of taken a moment to think about that, I'd like to invite you to bring to mind times when you feel the most inspired, like the creativity is just flowing. And notice, where are you? What time of day is it? What is the weather like? What are you wearing? Are there other people around? What happened just before you started working? Is there anything else that you notice when it feels like creativity is flowing? And then I'll ask you to bring to mind the times when you feel the most stuck, like the creativity is blocked. And we'll go through the same questions. Where are you? What time of day is it? What's the weather like? What are you wearing? Are there other people around? What happened just before you started working? Is there anything else that you notice? And just write down anything that pops for you. Some of these questions you might have, it might just be blank. Others, it might be very like, oh yeah, that is a thing that always makes me feel inspired. That's a thing that always makes me feel blocked. Or that's the thing that I really enjoy. It feels good when it's like this. It feels right. And these answers will be unique to each of you. There are no right or wrong answers. This is about starting to investigate the relationship that you have with your creative work and also with everything else that goes into accessing your creativity. As I want to posit that accessing creative flow is an inside job and an outside job. So I have a good friend who is a writing coach, and she does a whole section in her mastermind about healing creative wounds. And I think that that's really, she'll say there's no such thing as writer's block. When you feel blocked, it's because a wound has been activated, a creative wound, right? And so that's what I mean when I say the inside job. It's an inside job of believing that you have good ideas that are worth sharing, believing that you have something that's interesting to create, right? That's an inside job. And I'm here to talk about the outside part. It's an outside job as well. The environment has a profound effect on your body, your mind, and by extension, your creative work. Your space is an extension of yourself. So if I like to think about like the body, right, is an interior space. We have an interior to the body. And then beyond that, what's an extension of the body? The physical environment, the physical space that we're in, whether that's our home, our office, our studio, a small room that functions for many different things, one corner of a room that we share with other people. Right? Your space can nourish you. Your space can support you. Your space can be a source of relaxation and restoration. And your space can be a canvas for creative expression and a source of inspiration for your creative work, right? So I also have seen, and this is interesting to me, and I'm curious if this resonates for you, but I've seen some folks who work as artists, you know, on the canvas or on the page or digitally, and they're so creative in that media and that kind of format, and they forget that they can actually use the same ideas to create an inspiring environment in 3 dimensions and beyond 3 dimensions, right? And we'll talk about that too. I'm just going to check in with the chat. Jeremy, hi Jeremy. Being too careful and too specific makes me feel blocked. Being willing to fail makes me feel in flow. Love it. Yes, totally. And that's the inside job part that I'm talking about for sure. So let's start exploring what might be missing from your workspace that desires to be expressed there. And how would it feel to create an environment in your workspace that nourishes and inspires you? If you don't already have it, right? And it's not all or nothing, it's a spectrum. We'll get into that a little bit more as we go. But just thinking about these questions to get started. So awareness, reclamation, and expression. This is a framework that I use, and of course it's just one way of many, to understand the pathway to healing or reconnecting our relationship to our space. So when I think of the word healing, I just think of like something is broken and we have to reconnect it. And the way that we disconnect from certain parts of our experience, sometimes from our bodies, sometimes from relationships, sometimes from with other people, sometimes from relationship with our physical space. It's a way that we cope when we're overwhelmed or when we feel like we don't have an empowered kind of relationship with our space. We don't really know what to do with it. It's not working for us, or we're really focused on something else, and so we're just like not aware of it, right? And so a way to harness the potential of the space and the environment to support us and to nourish our creativity starts with how do we repair that relationship to the space. So when I talk about awareness, I think of awareness as noticing. Noticing by shining a light on what is actually there in present time. So being willing to look at what is the current state of my space, what is the current state of my relationship with my space. And that's what I was sort of starting to ask those questions. Those are awareness questions, right? Let's just start looking at what's there, what inspires me, what doesn't. The next step is reclamation, and reclamation is taking action to restore your sovereignty in the situation or the environment. So reclaim your space obviously is all about reclamation in many ways, and this word sovereignty is kind of at the heart of everything that I teach. And I see sovereignty as this statement of I get to choose. I get to choose from a space of my authentic desire. I get to choose from a space of knowing myself well and knowing what is good for me in my environment. And then expression. And expression is intentionally choosing what comes next based on that authentic desire. So reclamation is taking the actions, and then expression is like continuing forward and into what comes next. And a note that this is not a linear process, right? This is sort of more of a cyclical process. I think it kind of happens in layers, right? We peel back layers and then there's more layers. I also noticed that often we can be at different stages of this process in different areas of our space. So one area might be set up exactly how we want it. We've done all this work. We've looked at it. We've thought about it. We've taken away all the things that aren't ours, that we don't want in the space, and we've really designed it and set it up exactly how we want. And then we turn around to the other side of the room, maybe on that side, not so much. And that's okay, right? So we go gently, we keep going and kind of in these spirals, and we keep moving forward. But wherever you are in the process, you can take a step forward in that area. And so in other words, awareness is choosing to look at and see what is there. Reclamation is clearing what doesn't feel good or what isn't yours from the space. And then expression is bringing in and creating what you want it to be. But why is this important? Before I continue, if anyone has a question, let me know. Put it in the chat, or raise your hand, or just open up. The mic is always open. So, why is this important? We're going to talk about all of our senses now. This is why it's important, and this is so fascinating to me. So, our environment, let me back up a second. So around the same time that I started Reclaim Your Space, I had also started learning about trauma healing, somatic practices for trauma healing. And I, as you heard in my bio, I've also studied yoga for over a decade now. I've been teaching and practicing yoga. And so that was like a lot of body awareness, but this piece was about kind of energy awareness and also kind of more subtle body awareness, the physiological impact of trauma on the body. And one of the things that I realized, and that's again at the heart of Reclaim Your Space, is that our environment, the objects in our environment, they hold energy, emotions, and stories for us. And we're engaging with our space on many more levels, subtle levels, than what we might be paying attention to on a day-to-day basis, right? So this all weaves into how a space can be nourishing to you or depleting, again, either consciously or unconsciously. Like some things might be very obvious, like sometimes my bedroom feels very stressful because there's a giant pile of laundry in the corner. That's very obvious, right? But what might be less obvious is that I have a picture frame on the dresser that reminds me of something, that triggers a memory for me, that kind of activates a part of my experience that's not fully processed, and therefore I go into a bit of a freeze every time it catches my eye. And I might not even be aware of that connection. But my energy and my body is having a reaction to something in my space on a subtle level, right? So then we can magnify that by tuning into all of our senses, right? Because our environment influences our nervous system and the wiring of our brain through our physical and energetic senses. The entire sensory experience of our environment is included in this, right? Sights, sounds, scents, tastes, touch. And it will either activate the sympathetic nervous system, which is fight, flight, freeze, appease, or the parasympathetic nervous system, rest, restore, relax, heal, right? So it could be a scent, like I said, it could be a glimpse of something, an object, there's so many things, but our bodies are constantly tracking for safety in our environment. And when we start to realize that, we can then use that to our benefit by creating an environment that is reflecting back to us, you are safe, you are safe, you are safe, and beyond safe, here are some things that light you up, here are some things that inspire you, here are some things that energize you, here are some things that get you going, right, from a creative standpoint. So another way to think about this is that the physical sensory experience of your environment will either work to block your creativity or work to support and allow your creativity to flow. Because when we are in freeze or when we feel blocked, that is like an element of, it's not safe to express myself right now, even if you're alone in your studio. And when we are relaxed and inspired, then things can flow, right? But inspiration, I think, comes from a state of a deactivated nervous system, right? This is happening all the time. There's an exclamation point here because when I first started putting a similar presentation together, it was like this aha moment for me. I was like, oh, this is happening all the time. Our body is constantly tracking all of this information, and we're bombarded with it from all around. And that can feel overwhelming and disempowering, but actually, I like to think of it the opposite. That's really empowering information because then I can very intentionally create an environment that is giving me the messages to my body and to my mind that I desire to be giving myself. I like to think of these experiences as poles on either end of a spectrum, and so I call it the stress relaxation spectrum. One is stressed and 10 is relaxed. Then we could also think of it as when we're at a 1 state, our creativity is blocked. When we're at a 10 state, it's flowing, and typically it's sort of somewhere in between and fluctuating between all of this, right? That we're constantly changing, our environment's constantly changing, but how do we continue kind of moving towards a 10? So I'm going to ask you to sort of tune in now, again, to your own experience, and you can share if you want in the chat. You can just put a number, but how does your current workspace make you feel on a scale of 1 to 10? Seven, great. 8, love it. Not at home in it yet. Yeah. Christina, 5. Awesome. Miles, 3. Got it. Patty, 6. Okay. Barbara, 9. Awesome. Lisa, 4. Cool. So now, this is where it gets fun, I think. Start bringing to mind a place where you felt closer to a 10. And we're going to do a little bit, if you're willing to play with me, we're going to do a little bit of a visualization. But it starts by picking a place where you felt closer to a 10. Now, I'll tell you, my place is almost always the beach, standing on the beach. It's my favorite. So it doesn't have to be a workspace specifically for this exercise, is what I'm saying. It's really about just a place where you really felt inspired, ideas were flowing, conversation was flowing, felt good in your body, etc. When we are connected with our bodies and our nervous system is in a relaxed state, right, which is what we're aiming for in this practice, we get access to the most creative problem-solving centers. So this is like neuroscience that, again, fascinates me. The frontal parts of our brain have to do with kind of decision making, they're like the control centers of our brain, right? Creativity, problem solving. And then the hindbrain is the more primal part of our brain. And that's kind of, from an evolutionary standpoint, is the oldest part of the brain. And it has to do with just survival, right? So when our body is relaxed, there's blood flowing to all the parts of the brain, and we're able to activate kind of all the parts of the brain. But when we are triggered, or when our nervous system is activated because of something in our environment, all of the attention goes to the hindbrain, and it's really all about, how do I get out of this alive? So our brain and our body sometimes can't tell the difference between, I saw a picture that sparked a memory of something that triggered me, from, there's a tiger chasing me through the jungle, right? It's the same reaction in the body. And so, as I'm sure you can imagine, when you're in that state, you're not at your most creative, you're not at your most productive, you're not at your most focused, you're not really able to function at the highest level of how you might want to function in your work and what you're creating. From this relaxed state, however, we can access our most authentic creative expression. And so that's why I believe it's so important to account for this physical sensory experience of our environment. So here we go into this guided practice. So I like to think of it as teleportation. We have access in our mind to go to other places and times, just by using our imagination, right? Kids are really good at this. As grown-ups, we sometimes forget. But this is really pretty powerful, and something that you have access to at all times, right? So in a way, it renders all of my work almost moot, because you can create this experience for yourself no matter what the physical environment is. However, our physical environment can support it, right? That's all right. So if you feel comfortable closing your eyes, you may. I invite you to do so. If not, that's fine. Just sort of choose a point to focus on, and the wall in front of you, and just soften your gaze. So either eyes closed or soft gaze. And like I said, bring to mind that place where you felt closer to a 10, that fully relaxed state where things were flowing, felt inspired, felt the creativity, the creative ideas were flowing, conversation was flowing, communication was working well. And then take a deep breath in and out. And as you bring this place to your mind, I want you to imagine that you are actually there. So you might be sitting, lying down, or standing in this place. And start to notice, what are some of the sensory experiences of being there. So, for example, what do you hear? What are the far away in the background kind of ambient sounds that you hear? Perhaps hear birds chirping, or traffic, or other people's conversations. Or the sound of the ocean, the waves rolling. And then bring to mind, what are some of the close-up sounds that you hear? Perhaps it's the sound of your own breathing, or the sound of someone's voice next to you. Or something else. And then next, bring your attention to what you can smell. Are there scents being carried on the air? Do you smell a fragrance, or an essential oil, or something that's on your body, on the body of a loved one? Perhaps it's the smell of something delicious that you're about to enjoy. And then add in taste. Is there anything you can taste? Sometimes the air itself has a little bit of a taste to it, or you just had a bite of a treat or a sip of a drink. And now we'll start to pay attention to touch. What are the sensations on your skin? Is the air still, or is it moving? Is it warm or cool? Are there any textures that you can feel, either from your clothing or from what your hands or your feet are touching? If you're sitting or lying down, is the surface that you're on hard or soft, supportive or not? Is there a touch of an animal or another person? And then finally, and I always do this one last, what can you see? We can tend to over focus on what we can see in our environment, but it's a small piece of information, of much bigger information. So what can you see? What are the colors, the textures? Is the landscape or the room or the space that you're in kind of busy and full of objects and a lot going on, or is it more sparse and quiet? Is it dark or light or something in between? Are there shapes or patterns or a particular image that catches your eye? And now see if you can hold that full sensory experience for just a few moments more. And actually kind of let that settle into your body, enjoy how it feels. And notice if any other thoughts or ideas come to your mind while you're sitting or standing or lying in that space. And then take a final breath here and start to wiggle your fingers, your toes, flutter your eyelids, and gently come back to this moment in the room you're sitting in. Look around the room. You can touch your hands to your face, your arms, and coming back to the present moment. Look around the Zoom room, see each other's faces. And I'd love to hear how that feels. Like, what are the sensations in your body right now? How are you feeling? You can put in the chat or share on the mic. And I know it's funny because when I do this in person, the whole energy of the room shifts, but I can still even feel it on Zoom. So even though you're all on mute, I can see your body language. I can just sense something has just settled in, settled down. Sad. Yeah. Interesting. Thank you for sharing. I am this feeling and this sensation, whatever it stirred up for you, right? You have access to that at any time to explore it. And if it left you feeling sad, I think that's really interesting to gently explore. And was it the space itself, or was it the coming back? leaving that behind. If it left you feeling more peaceful and relaxed in your body. Yeah, do you want to share? Yeah, go ahead.
So I moved to a new place at the end of October, and my partner will be coming to live with me, but I've been here 6 months kind of by myself, setting everything up. And I loved the inside of my house. I had the walls were painted the colors I liked, and it was a work of art. He built all these built-ins, and I mean, I had my paintings and other artists' paintings everywhere, and I had music accessible, and it just everything was. I knew where everything was, and moving here has been such a disruption to my creativity. I did finish one painting that I had started many years ago, and I sketched out, for something out, two things for other pieces, but my heart isn't in it. I'm just so unhappy with this space. And a lot of the work that has to be done is more stuff that my partner knows how to do very well. And it would be ridiculous for me to even try. But that whole thing is just like, I can't put artwork up if I'm going to paint the walls. It doesn't make sense. And I can't put artwork up, particularly in the living room area, because the ceiling has to be, it needs attention. It's not that it's leaking or anything, it's just ugly. And I don't know. So I'm kind of like trying to enjoy the space and the outdoors, but it's been really stressful and very sad. I wake up in the morning, it's like, oh my God, I'm still here. And I should be grateful because I have a big room now, which I didn't before, but I actually was thinking of things I could do to make it more for me. Like I need more visual in there. And I thought of some things that I could do. So not while I was meditating just now, but when you were speaking earlier, and I thought, oh, well, that might work. So thank you for that.
Absolutely, you're welcome. And I just want to honor like transitions and moves are really challenging times and they will be disruptive to your creativity. That like sounds totally normal to me. And so I hope that as we continue going through the presentation, even more, you might have even more ideas in terms of like how can you make small changes now to make the space kind of as um, supportive as possible during the transition, right? Like allowing it to be temporary, like temporary situations that you can sort of set up for yourself so that you're nurturing yourself through that process as well. If that makes sense. All right, Gretchen. I was nestled in the sand, feeling the scratchy sand texture and the soft stones, hearing the tapping waves, the seagulls. Paintings I've been doing relate to this wide, vast horizon. I love that. I was there too, on the beach. Like I said, I always go back. And I love that it ties in with the creative work you're working on right now too. That's really fascinating. This slide here. Oh, Miles, I found one place that is so special, but also reminded me of former beloved places that I miss. Yeah, totally. Yeah, so that's where that bittersweetness, right? That sadness, I can totally understand why that might come in. And I like to think of it as I don't know where I got this idea, but someone once I was working with suggested that set up these memories as like little treasures, and I have like a treasure chest in my mind I can go to anytime, and I open it up and I pull one out and I go there. And by going there with all of your senses, right, by really bringing in that full sensory experience, it's like you've taken yourself there for that little while, right? And it's amazing because physiologically your body's having that same response as if you were standing there in real time. And that's what I think is so fascinating about that exercise. And then also just about, in general, how the sensory, right, that connection between sensory information and the state of the body and the state of our emotions and the state of our ability to create what we want to create. So this slide is just a reminder that, as I said from the very beginning, there is not one right or wrong way to do it. We all had our own special places that we went to. We all have our own sovereign place inside of ourselves where we can access our desire for our space, and where we can access and have an understanding of what is it that nourishes us, which is very specific to us, right? The colors that are going to be inspiring or nourishing to me might be totally different than for each of you, and even different over time. So even as we move to a new space, we might not recreate the exact thing that we had before. We might find that our desires are different. So coming back into that sort of sovereign center to make those decisions and those choices for our space is very important. And what I find here is there are some challenges that seem to kind of show up again and again as we start to think about, how do I want to create a space that nourishes me in a very personal way, right? My creative work in a very personal way. The first is a lack of access to our desire due to cultural, familial, or religious, or even societal conditioning, right? It's not taught to tap into your desire. It's taught to do the thing that's maybe most comfortable for everyone else around you. Perhaps your desire doesn't match up with what what the environment you were raised in, for example. The second is comparison that affects our access to what truly brings us joy and pleasure. So I think about this one a lot, right? We're bombarded now with images of other people's spaces on Instagram and Pinterest and Facebook, and it can feel kind of like, oh, my space isn't as big as theirs, so it's never going to be the same. Or, oh, they've got it all together and I'm a mess. Or, I hear people say these kinds of things all the time. And the truth is that those are usually not real. It sounds so simple, but I say it all the time. I used to do remodeling projects, and we would go photograph people's homes. And before we would take the pictures that we're going to put on our website, we would have to take pictures of all the stuff that was out, then tuck it all away, then take our professional photos, then put all the stuff back exactly how we found it, right? The piles and the box of tissues and right, like all of the things of everyday life that were there. And so those picture perfect kind of magazine, architectural digest photos of spaces, they're not what's real in terms of spaces that function and nourish like what we're creating. We work in, especially many creatives that I work with, their spaces are often much more full and have a lot of what I call active mess, right? Where there's a project that's in progress over there, and there's a project over here that's in progress, and here's all the things that are waiting to go out to the gallery, and here's or the exhibit, or right, like our spaces are meant to be living, breathing kind of organism that supports us. And so that is, again, sort of normalizing a workspace that is for working and not just for show, right? And then third is the discomfort of change. And so for context, what I mean here is when we've been doing something a certain way, or when a space has kind of been a certain way for a long period of time, even if it's not feeling good, right? So even if it was like a 4, when I said on 1 to 10, what number is it? It's a 4, but so we know like, oh, it could be working better for me, but we're also kind of acclimated to the 4, right? So I call this the trap of the uncomfortable comfort zone. If we're acclimated to the 4, even the changes that we make to quote unquote improve the space are going to feel weird at first. They're going to feel a little uncomfortable. And there's going to be this pull, it's kind of like a rubber band, like it's going to be this pull back to how it is now and how it's been, especially if it's been a certain way for a long period of time, right? On the flip side, if we know that and we can work with it, then we can acclimate gently over time by making small, meaningful changes and allowing it to be a gentle process so that we are adjusting and kind of remapping our space and getting comfortable with it again and again and again every time we change it. And so a big part of how I always recommend people work when they're working on making changes to their space is gently. And then when you've made a big change or when you start to see progress, take time to enjoy it. Like take time to physically be in the space, look, feel, use all your senses to enjoy those changes you created and sort of reacclimate your system to the new space you created so that you're not kind of snapping back so quickly every time, right? The other thing is that actually making these changes will start to spark new ideas because we get comfortable and then we only sort of see a very narrow amount of like everything else starts to kind of disappear or like, right? Like how often do you actually look at the paintings on your wall that have been hanging there for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, right? Do you actually stop and look at them? Do you sit and gaze at them, right? But if you move that painting to a different wall, tomorrow it'll catch your eye. And it'll catch your eye for like a little while. And so again, it will start to spark new connections happening in your brain, new creative problem solving, etc., because it's all connected. So I bring up these challenges because I think being aware of what's truly getting in the way is the first step in making a sustainable change. So if we're kind of sitting in a space and just feeling like, okay, I'm just stuck, like the reality is that there's all these things at play. There's all these factors that are quote unquote invisible that are affecting us day in and day out. If we're looking at them and we start kind of bringing them to the visible realm and we start paying attention to them, then we can actually make those meaningful changes. So let's begin to imagine it together. And I am aware of the time. Are we good to go for a little bit longer? Yeah, you're good? Okay, I'm good too. So practical considerations. Once again, my most important message, there is no one right way to set up your workspace. What works well for you might not work well for someone else at all, and vice versa. So sure, go out, gather ideas, but really pay attention to what sparks like deep inside of you. So like if something sparks like an idea like for something else, great, do it. But if something is like, well, that just looks kind of beautiful, but like it doesn't match the way that I work in any way, like it's not going to work for you, right? There's a mismatch there. So allow your deeper kind of inner desire to guide you as you are gathering inspiration for your workspace, or even choosing what you want it to be like, how you want to set it up. Also important, and this is kind of circling back to the beginning, setting up the physical environment thoughtfully can make a huge difference in your creative work and in your flow. And some creative blocks are truly an inside job, right? The result of creative wounds that need to be addressed with other types of support. So this is like, I always say, like we work outside in and also inside out. If you start working with those, with creative wounds, and if you already have been working with that from the inside, right? You're going to see that there's going to be a desire to let those changes kind of become visible in your environment as well, right? You're going to find, you might even find like, I want to move some furniture around, or I want to throw away some stuff because something has shifted in your internal landscape that wants to be reflected out there and supported and reinforced by the environment. So again, practical considerations. So now we're just going to bring it down to like, what are the things to think about when setting up your space? And I'm going to break it down by the 5 senses. We're back to the 5 senses, right? Because this is how the space engages with the body and the physiology of the body. So what you can see, and I'll go through pretty quickly, but again, you'll have access to the recording, and I encourage you to take notes just on the things that really like spark for you or light up ideas as you go. So lighting is important. Do you have natural light? Is it bright? Is it dim? What's the color of the light? Varied sources of light coming from different directions. Again, you're looking for lighting that feels good to your body and inspiring to your work, but they're often, I think, related. Color and pattern. So dark or light colors, what's the saturation, how much contrast, intensity, busy, quiet, right? Imagery. So is it sparse or full of imagery? Is it abstract or realistic? Are there words or pictures or mirrors? Paying attention to what's in front of you and what's behind you. So wherever you sit, spend the most time, right? And again, this is not just like where you create your art, but also like where do you sit on your Zoom calls, or where do you sit where you're working on your website, or like you're writing your emails. Paying as much attention to what's in front of you as what's behind you, right? Periphery, so what's in your line of sight at all times. Like I mentioned before, like it could be one little thing in your periphery that kind of can trigger a block. Objects in the space, minimal or maximal, being thoughtful and intentional with the objects you choose to have in your space, practical objects, and also objects that inspire you, right? Or some things that you've created. And then we go to what can you hear? So I'm kind of calling it ambient sound, right? The background sounds, people's voices, pets, children, traffic, the buzzing of electronics, the sounds of nature. So some of those you don't have maybe as much control over, but just paying attention to like, how is it affecting you? And then added sounds. Do you have music? Is it soft or loud? Noise machines or nature sounds that you bring in, or fans. So again, kind of where can you create something that you know will support what you're trying to, the environment you're trying to create, the sensory experience. And then there's the sounds of the process, right? Depending on what you make and how you make. Maybe there's clicking or banging or swishing or humming or singing or whirring or blowing. And again, just noticing how do those different types of sounds affect your nervous system. And what you can smell. So the ambient scents, right? The ones that we don't always have control over, nature, pollution, garbage, the smell of the materials you're working with or other people. And then added scents, flowers, essential oils, fragrances, maybe foods or drinks that you bring into the space. And what you can taste. Ambient tastes, so I mentioned sometimes there's flavors in the air or from the materials you're working with. And then added tastes, like having a treat that you enjoy, or food, or a cup of coffee, or gum, or mints. And what you can feel. So comfort, this is also very important. What type of furniture do you use? Do you sit or stand? What are the ergonomics of the furniture? Are the surfaces around you hard or soft? The flooring material, what's under your feet? Is it cushioned or is it firm? And what's the level of support? What about your clothing? What are you wearing? Soft clothes that are comfortable, or are you dressed in things that are more stiff? Shoes, cushioning, blankets, weight. Like what's the weight of the materials on your body? Textures. Not just like what you can feel with your hands, but like, the texture of your clothing, or the texture of the surfaces you're working on, smooth, rough, dry, wet, texture of even the air, right? Air quality. Soft, stiff, cool, warm, natural or synthetic. And the atmosphere, airflow, temperature. Is there sunlight or shade? Do you have control over how much sunlight or shade you have in the space? And then sharing your space. So this isn't so much sensory, but this is a little more practical, right? Do you share your space with other people? If so, I always encourage folks to create and communicate clear boundaries and guidelines, and then set up intentional sovereign spaces within the larger space, right? So if you share your home, which are your own sovereign spaces, and you'll say, okay, this is my space, I'm going to be using it during this time, please don't touch what's here, or please don't leave your things in my space, or please don't take my things out of my space, right? Touchstone spots. This is, again, kind of circling back to, you may not have your entire space set up exactly how you want it right away or at all times, right? So I teach touchstone spaces, which are small areas that are set up really intentionally, that are kind of often in your line of sight, so that you can kind of rest your eyes there and be inspired. Also practicing verbalizing your requests and being willing to reiterate when necessary, right? So again, this is when you're sharing with other people. And when you're sharing your space with other activities, like I think Miles, you mentioned that, how can you kind of signal to your mind, body, physiology, like what are we focusing on now? So I like to think about like tokens or talisman that signals which activity it is. So maybe you have like special crystals that you put out like when you're doing your art, and other things when you're doing your office work, or maybe it's like a poster on the wall that or a piece of fabric that you put up at certain times and take down at others. Thoughtful organization is important when you're sharing a space with multiple uses. And then you can think about like a ritual or some being kind of methodical when you're switching between different activities. It could even be that in the room, you're facing one direction when you're doing one type of activity, and you're facing a different direction when you're doing a different type of activity. Again, signaling to your body and your mind, like what we're working on now and what type of energy, what type of flow we want to have. And then like visual or other sensory signifiers. So maybe you have a certain candle that you light when you're doing your art, right? Or a certain kind of snack that you have when you're doing your office work. So the last thing I'll say is that I really do believe that your workspace can nourish you. It can reflect what brings you joy, and it can inspire your creativity. And it's been my honor to share these thoughts, ideas, and tools with you tonight. And I hope it's been supportive for you as well. Like I said, I have time for some live Q&A, but I'm going to check in with the chat really quick before we start. And yeah, and then we'll go from there. So thank you all very much. All right, Aviva, I used to move my paintings around in my house, putting some away and hanging ones I haven't been living with for a while. Yes, I love that, like a rotation. Yeah, and it does, it keeps things fresh, right? It keeps us kind of looking and seeing, not just looking, but actually seeing. Gretchen, bravo, and thank you. You've guided me towards an inspiring inner place and stimulated the questions of my outside space. Sorry, I didn't get to say goodbye, Gretchen. I will say goodbye soon. Miles, how do you manage this process in shared space with your partner or others? Timothy, good night. Thank you too. Yeah, great question. Do you want to get on the mic and just kind of tell me a little bit more about the scenario specifically? I can speak to that specifically, or do you want me to just kind of answer in a more general way?
Well, let's see. We're both artists, and we do have our own separate spaces, but we have a lot of shared space that comes into play with all of these concepts. And it's tricky navigating that with your partner. I don't know. Do you have any suggestions?
Yeah, totally. So first of all, yeah, this I think is one of the more challenging pieces of like, how do we set up our space when we're sharing our space with another person? And particularly, I guess, if there's kind of a difference in, right? Because like I said, this is going to be different for every person. And sometimes you're sharing with a person who has very different kind of needs or sensory desires than you. So I kind of think of it like a Venn diagram, right? So where there's like the two circles and they overlap in the middle. Are there ways to create the to kind of each tune into your desires and then figure out, okay, these are the spaces in the home that we're going to sort of set up that are going to feel really nourishing to me. And these are the spaces that are going to feel really nourishing to you, but might be a little more uncomfortable for me. And then like, where do our desires and our interests and like our what inspires us, where do they overlap? And maybe we can create some spaces that are really thoughtful about being intentionally created for both of us. And then, right, and kind of like real, it is going to take, it takes a couple things, right? It takes communication. It takes a willingness to kind of have guidelines and boundaries around certain spaces, I think. And then last, I think it takes like a little more just creative problem solving. Like, okay, where can we actually find like a third way that might not be what I would choose just for me or what you would choose just for you, but like what's the us version of it, right? What's the us version of like this exercise? And what would that look like? Yeah, does that help at all? And do you have any follow-up questions?
Well, I mean, that's very reasonable.
And I will say this, sometimes with outside support, I used to, like when I would do renovation projects, or I would go in and I'd be like, okay, I'm also a relationship counselor and I'm here to help you kind of figure out what you want for your home, right? Because it's very personal. So yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, I mean, it's very reasonable. But then, you know, in every relationship you have, I don't know. Never mind. I don't know where I'm going with that. Just thank you for your, you know, your insight.
Yeah, no, you're welcome. And it is a very real thing. You know, when I first started doing these sessions on Zoom, I walked through virtual walkthroughs of some people's homes, and it was fascinating because I could learn a lot about the relationship dynamics in a partnership just from looking at how their home was set up as well. So it's a very real thing. Like I said, our home is often a reflection and an extension of things that are happening on the inside as well. So, and it's a very tender personal thing.
Yeah, the decision-making process is can be pretty complex, you know, with with very opinionated individuals. So, you know, that are all
Yeah.
part of it.
Totally. Yes, it can be helpful to have a mediator in that process, and that's definitely a role I've played in the past. So I get that. All right, checking in with the chat. Aviva said, thank you for your thoughts, ideas, directions to promote intention, practicality, and especially like the trap of the uncomfortable comfort zone. Yes, you're welcome. Yeah, I agree. That's a good one. Anything else that you want to share on the mic, Aviva?
Well, a lot of your points, you know, kind of hit home, and I'm berating myself for not, you know, I have this big room, and why am I not in there? And I'm finding other things to do. And but a lot of the things that you touched upon explain why I'm not immediately doing that. I don't want to, you know, I feel like I should force myself to be in there, but my home where I lived for 40 years was an expression of myself completely. People would come in and they'd be like, wow, I could really tell an artist lives here. And I don't feel that way at all where I am now. And it's just a matter of patience and time and step by step. But I'm 71. I don't have the same kind of energy I did when I was in my 20s and I started fixing up that house with my partner. Like, you know, it's, you do 3 things and you're like, I need a nap, you know, which I don't take, but it's, I'm kind of scared that it's not going to pull together. And I realized as you've been speaking that I really, really need that, so that I have that feeling of this is where I belong, this is my space. And not to take up too much time, but the studio has these dark brown, this whole house is a lot of beige and brown, dark brown cabinets, and they're very useful, obviously, but I'm thinking I might need to take the doors off some of them so I could see my materials, because I find that inspiring. or take photographs of what's inside and put that on the outside, put some cork on some of them so I could pin up, you know, ideas, sketches, paint, you know, pictures of paintings and posters and all that. So
yeah, I think that this is a very beautiful example of like seeing the space itself as the canvas, and especially because you're feeling like it's blocking you in your other art, like, okay, so this is the first art project, is like how to, right, and how to do it creatively in small ways. What are big impact decisions, right? Like you said, like a lot of times another way that we kind of, that blocks get manifested is in procrastination, or in kind of like doing less important tasks because they're less, you know, it's like avoidance of the thing that's uncomfortable. So just very gently being like, what's going to make the biggest impact today? And it might be hanging a painting just for now, and it can be taken down and hung somewhere else later, right? Like maybe it's just something, like it might be one piece, one step each day that kind of adds a little bit of that personal touch to your space, so you can start activating that creative.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. All right, Lisa, my creative space is also the area where I do the business of being an artist, and I feel that part is taking over the space. Yeah, any suggestions on bringing the creative back into the business workspace? Totally get this. And yeah, and I was thinking about this a lot as I was putting the presentation together as well. It's like, oh, your workspace as an artist isn't all just, you know, paints and photos and whatever, right? I think for me, one of the things I would suggest is really looking at that multi-sensory experience of the space and allowing your art to still be front and center, even as the space is functional. So I also kind of, one of the things that I recommend to folks is prioritizing things on like the level of like what wants to be displayed and what just needs to be like in a functional place that I can find it, right? So like files and or, you know, types of things, right? Like how can you kind of tuck them away in a place that they're not like taking over, or like books or electronic equipment, or like the things that don't need to be physically like visible and displayed, but like they have good homes. So like kind of having like these priorities. So like, here's all the items that I want to display because they inspire me and they make me happy and they remind me like why I'm even doing the business side of my work, right? It's like, this is the goal, is to be able to make the art. So and then just weaving in those like, okay, what's gonna help the space like smell really nice and feel really good on my body, and like, right, like bringing the body back into it will help it to feel more creative, I think, as well, because this is where we create from, right? We create from the body.
Yeah. Can I share something?
Of course. Yeah.
I'm not an artist, but when you were talking about a creative space and then maybe face the other way when you're doing like your business or vice versa, I thought that really spoke to me, because although I'm not an artist and a majority of what I do is like nonprofit management, there's pieces that are creative. I mean, there's always like connections being made and ideas being explored, but like just even making a graphic, right? Like a graphic design, or trying to come up with something for a post or something, you know, a little bit more not business-like, say, you know, something a little bit more pithy, but conversational for an email. I struggle with that because so much of what I do is organization and spreadsheets and meetings and conversations. And I miss having the time to really explore the creative piece. And I wind up getting frustrated. Like I'm on Canva trying to do something and I'm like, all right, it's good enough. You know, I just don't have the time or the energy. So and I do have a good space. It's very organized for nonprofit management work, but not necessarily to be creative in that way. So I really enjoyed hearing that. And I'm thinking of different things I can do, even putting something on the wall or just shifting where I do it within the room or the space that might be helpful. So thank you.
Awesome. Yes, you're welcome. I love that. that's so fun. All right. Does anyone else have any questions? I'm also going to pull, I put up on the screen, you can see places that you can connect with me on social media, and I'm going to, let's see, this might mess things up for a second, but I'm going to share with you a link as well in the chat where you can sign up for my email list. That's the best way to kind of stay connected with me. I have various different ways that I work with folks. So on Facebook, I'm at Tam Orlando or Reclaim Your Space with Tam. And on Instagram, it's visions_of_Tam. And my email address is here, tam@tam.world. Or you can visit my website, which is www.tam.world. I offer private in-person support in the Rockland County, Nyack area. I live in Valley Cottage, or global support virtually on Zoom. We do a whole bunch of things, but one of my favorites is weekly group clutter clearing calls where folks get on and work through their own projects in their home together alongside each other. And that's become a really nice rhythm and staple of my own experience as well. My home is looking good because of it. Folks, showing up every week and really sort of tending to their space in a supported way. It's been really fun.
What is that called again?
So that's a group clutter clearing is what I call it. And you'll find information about it on my website there.
I can also send out that information tomorrow in an email, because everybody who came tonight is going to get a feedback survey from me. Just basic, very short 3-minute survey, and also any ideas you might have for other workshops moving forward, things that you might want ACOR to provide or offer. So I can certainly include that information in it that Tam just gave us.
Yep. And like I said, if you see the link in the Zoom chat, it's tam.world/stay-connected. There's a free PDF that you can opt in for there when you sign up for my email list. And it's a task organizer with a twist is what I call it. So it's just an exercise you can go through on your own. But the idea is, how do you really simplify the process of tending to your home and to your space and to your workspace, et cetera, to your environment, in a way where you're still prioritizing like what you want to be creating in the world, right? And so that's a bit of fun. All right, any other questions before we hop off? Thank you all for being here with me. It's been lovely to meet you and spend this time together. Yeah,
Thank you, Tam.
Thank you. All right.
Great presentation. Thank you so much.
Awesome.
And as I said, once I have the video up on our YouTube channel, hopefully early next week, I'll be sending that out to everyone. But you'll get an email from me tomorrow with Tam's information that she just provided and the link to the survey. And I just want to say thank you for coming. And thanks again, Tam. It was really, really useful and interesting.
You're so welcome. It was lovely to be here. Thanks for having me.
Everybody have a good rest of the night. Bye.
Bye.
Good night.